This is Father Patrick Briscoe.
And this is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
Welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly donation to us on Patreon. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our Godsplaining episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts. Father Bonaventure,
Father Patrick.
Plato or Aristotle?
Ooh, Plato.
Plato or Socrates?
It's like one of those like back and forth lens game.
Indeed.
Plato.
Oh, Plato again. Still in Plato. Plato or Kant?
Oh, Kant. What? But they're the same person.
Kant or Thomas Aquinas?
Kant.
Kant or... no, we got to get off
Kant.
Kant. Yeah, exactly. Thomas Aquinas or Duns Scotus?
Oh, Duns Scotus.
See, exactly. I knew this was happening.
Yeah.
Duns Scotus or Wittgenstein?
Duns Scotus.
Yeah.
Wittgenstein
or Foucault?
Ooh, that's tough. Tractatus Wittgenstein's really good, but Foucault.
Foucault or Nietzsche?
Ooh, this is like Plato and Kant, like the same person. Oh, don't make me choose between them. That's tough. Yeah, that is really tough. It's objectively Nietzsche, subjectively Foucault.
Oh, wow. Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. So objectively, I mean, at least we ended up with Nietzsche at the end there.
That's right. Yeah.
So
He's more important in a syllabus. If you're going to do philosophy, Nietzsche is more important than Foucault.
I was taught as an undergraduate that a modern person has two choices, Aristotle or Nietzsche. And I think it's funny to choose, suggest, right, that Aristotle is the modern choice, but there it is, and of course the idea comes from McIntyre, right?
Yeah. That's right.
Do you think that's true? That we can choose Aristotle or Nietzsche, or are there other accounts that are substantively different from that polarity?
Plato, Augustine, that team is probably different. So the difference between an idealist and a realist and a nihilist, if you cut them those ways. So idealist is the Plato, Augustine, Kant tradition. Realist is the Aristotle, Aquinas.
I sort of thought you might stick it back in there.
Yeah, Aristotle, Aquinas.
No, this stool has three legs.
Yeah. And then, you just have idealist, realist, and then nihilist would be, Nietzsche and maybe Democritus, depending on how you count that. Carve him up, and then Foucault, that kind of stuff. Schopenhauer, maybe. Yeah, but definitely Nietzsche's the first serious, you could say, philosophical, I think, nihilist. Like the first serious. When I teach him, he's the first guy that's serious, a serious nihilist philosophically. Not just like, oh, maybe there's nothing that's true, or maybe, maybe there's no real nature, or maybe it's all a construct, maybe whatever. He's the first guy who gives you not only a critique philosophically of any sense of realism, but also a story, a genealogy about why you believe that in the first place. That's why he's so exceptional. It not only explains why you're wrong about your thought about realism and about the world making sense, but he explains you why you thought that. So he gives you a diagnosis of how you got there, and also a critique of that position, and that's pretty cool.
So I think this is very interesting, right? That you're asserting no, there are actually three choices here, because if one were to follow McIntyre and say there are only two choices, it's basically meaning over non-meaning.
Yeah,
as it were.
He gets it from the moral stuff. So maybe in the sense of moral virtue, like there's either Aristotelian virtue of the good life, or there's no moral meaning to life at all. So maybe that would be
the context about the virtue, right? It would be
right, exactly. So I was
more ethical, but
exactly.
but I think the point you're making is interesting, that there could be three traditions here, because you would have another account that one could choose and live by theoretically if one enjoyed standing at stoplights rather than jaywalking, for example. So there would be other accounts of reality that one could be invested in as a philosopher, but that makes two of them closer, the idealist and the realist, I would say.
And here's the tricky part, of course, is that from one man's perspective, these two guys are against this guy, but from another one, so for instance, I would put Nietzsche and Aristotle on one side, and Plato Plato and Augustine on the other side. So I
Please
would
say
put
more.
Nietzsche with Aristotle on this because both of them care about the virtuous life. It's not about some ideals outside of life, whether it be from a divine commander or Platonic forms and the form of the good, that kind of transcendent morality.
Right.
Both of them believe that morality is for here, like living the life is for here. It's just a question
Becoming good by being good.
It's just a question of, and Nietzsche, become who you are. So both of them are immanentists in terms of where goodness is found. Ultimate goodness is in this life. So they both have, in a sense, a virtue ethics of life looks like here. It's just the specific virtues, for instance, for Nietzsche, as opposed to, say, Aristotle or Thomas Aquinas, they disagree about the specific virtues of what the virtuous life is, but the conception of what the good life is, they have a similar one that's very different from, say, Kant or Descartes or Plato or that kind of thing.
So by now, some of our listeners are very annoyed with us because they don't even really know who Nietzsche is. And we've been sort of
fair.
like moving the furniture around in the room, expecting them to follow. So for someone who tuned in and said, like, I slept through my undergraduate class that, someone like you taught at Catholic University of America. And I can't remember who Friedrich Nietzsche is. Who is Friedrich Nietzsche and why is he Ireland's greatest philosopher?
That's exactly right. You'll have to explain the last one, but I'm sure you will. Friedrich Nietzsche is a German, born of a Lutheran family. His father was a pastor, so as a little boy, he was known as the young preacher because he would gather his friends out in the backyard and stand up on a little pulpit and give rousing homilies. He was 1844 is when he was born, died in 1900. Spent his last 10 years of life in a sanitarium in Switzerland. So he went mad. You can actually watch him there. If you go to YouTube, you can watch a clip of Friedrich Nietzsche chewing on his giant mustache. Is what he's usually recognizable as from. So you see him chewing on his mustache there, and you can actually watch him in silent films. Although there's a little bit music sound in the background, but he just sat there for like 9 years and had a few visitors, but couldn't talk. That was actually, he collapsed while protecting a horse in the street of Turin in Italy that was being beaten by its master. So Nietzsche's last intelligible act before he was taken to the sanitarium was hugging a horse on the street of Turin that was being beaten by its master. He stayed in the middle of it. So right away that gets you any sense of him being like an immoralist. He's an amoralist for particular reasons. He doesn't believe that you map on from some transcendent source morality, but he was a very moral man. He actually cared about these things deeply. That's why I think he's a lot closer to Aristotle than some people conceive him as being. But he grew up in philosophical context. He went to school, got a PhD in classical philology as a linguist, in a way, and got a chair at the ripe age of 24 at the University of Basel. Just unbelievable prodigy. One of his teachers, Albert Briscoe, said he can do whatever he wants. And within 10 years, he had to resign from his chair because of health and nutsness, because he was such a bizarre writer. Because classical philology, you'd expect these kind of erudite treatises with lots of footnotes. And if you've read Nietzsche, he writes like Blaise Pascal. He writes in little fragments. He writes short things. And it doesn't have any. So he produced his doctorate book, Birth of Tragedy, his postdoctorate book, has no footnotes. So it's a study of the birth of tragedy in Greek mythology. So it's ostensibly an academic study, and there's no footnotes. It's just his discussion of how tragedy is trying to reconcile the rational and the irrational parts of the human soul. So he's a genius, and everyone thought, well, that's just not our shtick. So immediately he's kind of like ostracized in this, even though he's recognized for being brilliant. And then that leads to him writing for a number of years, from 1879 until, well, really 10 years, I'd say. 10 years until 1889, before he collapsed protecting that horse, which is where we get most of the works we know from him. Thus Spoke Zarathustra, The Gay Science, Beyond Good and Evil, Ecce Homo, his biography, where it has great titles like Why I Am Not a Man, I Am Dynamite, Why I Write Such Great Books.
They really are incredible.
Oh, fantastic.
They're so good.
And Genealogy of the Morals and Twilight of the Idols, these kind of things. So he's a critic of Western culture. I think as a final point here that you could jump in on is, I think the best way to read Nietzsche is someone who has Western culture on the couch. He's at the same time as Freud is, psychoanalytic stuff. And what he's doing is trying to unearth the unconscious truths that the Western culture is trying to hide from itself insofar as it is given up on God, it needs to come clean on what it actually believes. And his job is to remove the repressions from Western culture now that it's given up on its superego, the sense of God. He's the first real atheist in that way. He really takes it seriously that God is dead. And he thinks that the Western society, if it's going to be honest with itself, needs to get rid of a bunch of stuff that it thinks it can hold on to without him, but it can't.
Yeah, this point is extremely important. So I want to, and we'll get
which
that.
is a big reason why it's right.
This. Yeah, exactly. So when we did our episode, Why Marx is Right.
Yeah.
What Marx was right about.
Yeah.
We did some of the same thing, right? Because it's easy to take a character like Friedrich Nietzsche and know only a caricature of Friedrich Nietzsche and dismiss it and say, "Oh, what an idiot." And I think one of the worst things about Nietzsche is that people know cartoons or caricatures about his thought connected to the socialist movement of Nazism.
Yeah.
And believe, therefore, that Friedrich Nietzsche was the philosopher who promoted the genocide of the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And that's not true, strictly speaking.
Not even loosely speaking.
Deeply problematic.
Yeah.
So we oughtn't dismiss Friedrich Nietzsche. Instead, we ought to take very seriously some of the claims that he's very right about. And I think the first and foremost one that we should begin with is this claim that God is dead. Because one of the things that I find most attractive about Nietzsche's philosophy is the observation that something has gone terribly wrong.
Yes.
That looking at the modern world, human beings are clearly not living up to their full potential, and something is very deeply depraved in the culture of the modern era. And so I think that beginning with this premise, God is dead. When I read Nietzsche's diagnosis, I read that this society is absolutely, well, a bunch of words I'm not going to say because this is a family show.
Yeah, it's going to be tricky, right? So, but Nietzsche, of course, is not going to say that there's anything wrong with God being dead. He's going to just note that it does make a difference.
Yes.
And so, for instance, in Gay Science, I think it's book 3, or in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, his prophet, he has a prophetic character in these books, a Zoroastrian prophet, who says this, God is dead, and they don't remember, people don't read the other part of that sentence, which is, God is dead and we have killed him. So the point of it is that the prophet, Zarathustra, and Nietzsche, through him, is telling Western society, look, yeah, God is not believed anymore. He's dead. But he's dead because you stopped believing him. Like, it's you that killed him. It's not like he died. Gods can't die. But they can die in the consciousness and the motivating principles and the structures of thought if you no longer believe in them. It's as if when you say, like, if someone said, like, well, Santa Claus is dead, and you say, what do you mean he never lived? And you say, yeah, but I mean like, they don't believe in him anymore.
Right.
In the same way, he wants to say, look, in the same way that you grew up you grew up at some point, spoiler alert, about Santa Claus, we as a society have grown up, and he's not saying any, like, descriptive, the good or bad. He's just saying, here it is. It's just true. We don't believe in Santa Claus. We don't believe in God anymore. But we still, like, put out cookies and milk, and we talk as if he's still there. And Nietzsche just says, no, take it seriously. Like, if you don't believe in God anymore, and I know you don't, and you know you don't, then guess what you don't get to have? You don't get to have science, you don't get to have reason, you don't get to have morality. Yeah, and he says, I'm okay with that, but you don't go halfway on this.
Right. The response there to underscore the point you're making, that the observation that Nietzsche is making is the thing that affords the most agreement, right? But the reaction is where the deep problem begins, because Nietzsche says, well, God is dead and you've killed him. Now we have the opportunity to create the world we want.
Yeah, transvaluation of values in this way. And we need to look at some of the things that we thought were true, but obviously now they were supported by this belief in God and Christianity or something. And therefore we need to realize that we only have to believe those if we choose to believe those. The will here. I don't want to say will to power because that's a misused phrase of his, but the sense of that he has a lot more positive and a lot more passive receptivity than just willing. which people sometimes read him as if he's Schopenhauer, but he's not. But that's a digression.
Schopenhauer would have been a good one to include at the top of the episode. Line him up with a couple others.
Yeah.
So I think too, and I skipped over the prophetic aspect. You were getting around to some of this, but I think part of the reason why Nietzsche is so compelling and what Nietzsche got right is the importance of the diagnosis of just saying God is dead and you have killed him, because I think a lot of the world is consumed by the kind of spiritual malaise that isn't even brave enough to admit that that's where they're actually at. Right.
Yeah.
The people aren't theoretical atheists; they're just kind of functional ones.
Right. And this is
and that's where Nietzsche, has a heroism and a kind of integrity that a lot of people today don't have. Yes, exactly.
It's funny, people say Nietzsche is against truth or something. In a way, he is, in the sense of truth actually tracking some eternal thing, like reality. And he says we give it up on that. So, but being truthful about yourself, about what you actually believe and are committed to, he's one of the most truthful philosophers you can find. He has this beautiful passage. I'll just read. This is Twilight of the Idols. If you're going to pick up one book to start with Nietzsche, this is the one to start with. And he talks about Twilight of the Idols, which is, the subtitle is How to Philosophize with a Hammer. And what he means by that is a hammer to sound out. So you check to see if something's hollow. You sound it out, and he finds the hollowness of Western culture without its center, and then you smash it. So it's both those things. And Twilight of the Idols is the play on of course, Wagner's Twilight of the Gods as they move away. And of course, for him, he thinks Western culture just said the gods are idols and we need to get rid of them. But he has this passage on, so he has a bunch of little screeds. But one of them is on George Eliot, who was that's her pen name. I forget who what her actual name is. But George Eliot, and she's an English moralist, and he hates English moralists. And he says this about her. They have got rid of the Christian God and now feel obliged to cling all the more firmly to Christian morality, that is, English consistency. Let us not blame it on little blue stockings a la Eliot. So blue stockings is like a woman who's trying to, hide herself behind something and get above where she ought to be, doesn't know her station, right? So she takes on a female name, this kind of thing. In England, in response to every little emancipation from theology, one has to reassert one's position in a fear-inspiring manner as a moral fanatic. That is the penance one pays here. With us, it is different. When one gives up Christian belief, one thereby deprives oneself of the right to Christian morality. And I think that is just so true, because the moral frenzy in eco stuff, climate stuff, any love wins, all this kind of thing, it's just what Nietzsche's right is like, it's going crazy because these people have given up on the actual right place for that kind of frenzy, if they want. Now, he's not interested in that. He's just diagnosing. He's listening to Western society, sitting on the couch, telling them about his dreams. He's diagnosing their repressions and problems. But he's saying, look, of course, you're sublimating the transcendent theological proposition of morality, and they're getting placed in places they shouldn't be, like this moral fanaticism. And you should just get rid of that entirely and be clean about it. Don't worry about, judging other people in this way. You don't believe in that anymore. That's a thing of Christianity with the Last Judgment. You don't believe in that? Well, then you shouldn't be judging people. That's profound.
Yeah, let's carry this a little bit deeper, right? Because Nietzsche's assault on Christian morality is not merely don't worry about it. It's that he thinks he calls it a slave morality.
Yes.
That Christians
he's with
offer
Aristotle.
a morality that is that preserves life for the weak, and the strong man, the brave man, the virtuous man has no interest in preserving all of these weak creatures. The weak ones need to become strong themselves.
Yeah, in the genealogy of morality, he tells us stories. This is his how. So he says, there's no morality, so okay, get rid of that critique. But how did we get here? This is the genealogy critique, the kind of like telling a story about why we believe in Christian morality. He says this. He says it's an incredible, bizarre historical circumstance where at some point a Greek master who was beating some slave, that slave said, "You'll get your comeuppance in the next life," or something. And Nietzsche says the biggest mistake is that Greek soldier or master, listen to this guy. This guy was a weak, puny, unimpressive slave. And the Greek was the Greek morality, so they're personified. Greek morality is the heroism, the kind of Aristotelian magnanimous man, all this kind of stuff. imminent power amongst the powerful. Okay. But for some reason, some of them started believing lies about this other place, like judgment and transcendent morality. And so the slave all of a sudden became the powerful one. But it was only because these Greeks listened to them. And Nietzsche says that was a mistake. Because what it meant is that now morality, the slave, to try to save his skin, imagined this ideal world out there and projected all there. And so all of a sudden, morality and good became a matter of delayed gratification. So when Nietzsche then carry this down to Christianity, he says, look, Christianity is just saying, oh, well, it's tough for here, but don't worry, it'll be better then. We don't have to worry about changing things here. We don't have to worry about being that. We'll just, let's just be humble and take it and all this kind of stuff. And he says, no, that's not virtue, right? That's treating morality as if it's some sort of delayed gratification program, which is really, he says, that's really silly. Either, goodness is goodness, not like a token you then later present and get it later. Like, that's just a cheap story.
Now, so this idea, though, about understanding Christianity as weak, it's
pity and mercy and forgiveness. It's
obviously quite an affront, because these are all the essentials of the gospel and things that we
humility,
hear.
The Beatitudes
every day from Jesus, right? So you have Nietzsche just on a full scale attack, and you say, well, how could anyone really have any sympathy for Nietzsche, who's dismissing, what tends to be the core of Christianity? And then you back up a little bit, and you understand that from the Aristotelian Thomistic perspective, to be virtuous is to pursue excellence. Mm-hmm. And to not wallow and to not be absorbed in self-pity, but really to want to be, you reference magnanimity, to really want to be a great man, to pursue excellence. And so when I look around at the culture, I don't see a lot of people that live that way in a way that's compelling to me. So I sympathize with Nietzsche. I say, well, I've seen, I see a lot of people that are just weak and that have no interest actually in improving their lives or themselves.
Yeah. Let's take it one more turn and say that Nietzsche's critique, if it's in its depth, is saying that while it looks like slave morality and Greek morality are different in this way they function, they actually have the same goal, which is you receiving good things. The Greek received good things because he takes them through his virtuous activity, all this kind of thing. That's a simplistic view. For the Jew, the slave morality, which is then he reads as Christianity taking up on this, they actually want to be Greeks. They want those good things and power. They want that. But because they can't get in this world, they punt it to the next one. But Nietzsche's diagnosis, and this is interesting, is that they're actually both about them being powerful. Mm-hmm. When we ought to take from it and say, that's not Christian morality, like delayed power versus power here, but rather in conforming ourselves to Christ and letting him be powerful, only then do we have this sort of true virtue. So humility is not delayed gratification for magnanimity later. Humility is always a virtue because God is always greater. This is where the Nietzsche thing will only get you so far, because if you don't believe in a God, then you're all it's got. But if you believe that God is ever greater, always greater, Jesuit motto, I suppose, then you're always going to be, in a sense, second place, and your only true happiness will be in knowing your place under Him, and that will mean humility will be what you want to be, not what you're here now, so that later you can, have Christ. Now you will reign and all this sort of thing, but you're always reigning with Christ, under Christ, and this sort of thing. So that's, I think, his diagnosis of secular Christianity is as delayed gratification. And our own kind of creeping sense, this is the spiritual point, right? This is imperfect contrition, right? Do I do good because I want good later, or do I not do bad because I don't want to be punished? Or do it because I love being like Christ, forgiving, being merciful, being humble, being patient, being apt to God's will, because He's going to always be there, and I've got to decide how I make sense of Him.
Right, and it's changing my life now.
Yeah,
and it's changing my life now. One of the risks, of course, in loving Nietzsche too much, there are many risks in loving Nietzsche too
Always
much,
dangers.
because you could follow where the master trod and land in the madhouse. But one of the risks, of course, is that you overlook this point about the slave morality or Christian morality, which is not that the good things are coming in the future, but that they're active even now. And this is again what you were getting to at the end. So I just want to underscore that point, is that the Aristotelian Thomist is going to say that it's making you good, it's making you better, it's making you happier, even currently, to pursue the way of the gospel, to pursue these little things, the way that they're washing over you, and that not all of that is delayed.
That's right. There is an imitization of the good. It's not like there's no good, Nietzsche, no actual good. There's just kind of your good, nor that there's good purely in the future, but rather the kingdom is here and now, that the good is imminent, but it's tied to the transcendent, not as coming later, but rather tethered because of the incarnation and because of grace that comes here to us, that then we can participate in it. So it is here, but it's from there, and then we participate in that.
Father Bonaventure, this has really been a crash course about what Nietzsche got right. We've just got a few basic ideas. We could go on for much longer. But what do you want to leave our listeners with? How would you like to conclude our conversation?
I think Nietzsche is a great tool for secular society to deal with them and understand their neuroses. I think he's great as a diagnostician about what they really believe or what are entailed by their view. But you just have to let him, put it this way, every psychologist goes home and spends time with his family at some point. And Nietzsche, you just need to realize, you can't be a psychologist all the time, and it'll lead to witheringness. So he is good, and where he's good, he's great, but he's not the Übermensch, really. That's Jesus Christ. So he's helpful, but he's not the Messiah.
Well, friends, thanks for tuning into this episode of Godsplaining. We encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Like and subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. We love seeing your comments. Comment on this episode. Maybe you have a favorite quote of Nietzsche you'd like to share. Maybe you have a philosopher that you love more than Kant. You could share that with Father Bonaventure.
Oh, Crucius.
Yeah, very nice. If you'd like to donate to the podcast through Patreon, follow the link in the description. You can also follow links in the description to shop Godsplaining merch and to get information on upcoming Godsplaining events. Friends, please continue to pray for us and know that we're praying for you. God bless.
Father Bonaventure, if you had to choose between getting Warby Parker glasses, subscribing to a YouTube channel, or flossing your teeth, what would you choose?
Oof. I guess, to be honest, subscribing to a YouTube channel.
See, folks, it's not as bad as flossing your teeth or getting Warby Parker glasses. Please subscribe to Godsplaining. Cheers.